Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Caterina Meloni from Connecting Founders. I'll be your host for this session. We'll be talking about how to present your story in the language of investors. I have a few slides, so let me share them with you now. Okay. All right. Okay. So first of all, let me just introduce Connecting Founders. We are a capital advisory firm focused on female founders. So we raise capital for female founded companies. We support in the so-called investment readiness, and then all the way to the capital raise. Currently, our portfolio is mostly made up of businesses at the seed and pre-series 8 stage, which are raising an average of $1 million to $1.5 million US. In terms of a geographic portfolio, we are very focused on Southeast Asia. You see Indonesia and Thailand, our key countries, and also the two countries that you see here from outside the region, United Kingdom and Hong Kong, actually have operations in Thailand. So we are heavily focused on Southeast Asia. In terms of the portfolio, in terms of sector, we are sector agnostic, which means that our clients operate across a range of different sectors, from F&B to edtech to beauty, etc. Another thing that I'd like to mention is that besides the capital raise and the support and the investment readiness side, what we do, we also provide advice for larger businesses that need portfolio accelerations. And by that, I mean repositioning, advice on anything related to restructuring, strategic expansion, etc., that they might need. Particularly now during the pandemic, there are a lot of businesses sort of reinventing themselves. Now, for the purpose of this talk, I also wanted to mention that two of our portfolio companies have reached the very final stages of the She Loves Tech competition, which is the largest global competition for women in tech, drawing over 3,000 startups from 30 countries in 2020. So we have two companies, Filmdo representing the UK and France, but actually is a Thai founder, and Duanium representing Indonesia, who have gone on to win their domestic rounds and then the semifinals. And now on Sunday, they will be competing in the grand finals, Sunday afternoon, I believe, Bangkok time. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that is because we've been very active in crafting the story with these two companies and building their investment deck and how to present the story in the language of investors. So I think their experience will actually be useful for the purpose of today's talk. So let's get to it. Now, the issue that sometimes we see working with entrepreneurs and investors on the other side is that the two parties speak a different language, and sometimes they have different perspectives, and sometimes you experience a so-called language gap where the two sides don't understand each other. But of course you do need to bridge this gap to be able to lead entrepreneurs towards a successful capital raise. So that's the key of what we do. Now, for entrepreneurs, it's not intuitive to present their story in the language of investors. Entrepreneurs are very comfortable talking about the product, the consumer, the market typically. But when it comes to pitching to investors, the company actually becomes the product. So the perspective and the dynamic is very different. So entrepreneurs typically think in terms of, is this possible? While investors think in terms of, is this probable? Is this likely to happen? And if so, will it be profitable? So fortunately, there is a sort of a, easy formula, an accepted or widely accepted way in the industry to present your story, a way that investors are accustomed to, and where not only the content is important, but also the flow, the different sequence of how you present the content in order for the narrative to be coherent and engaging. So this is how this narrative would look like. So first you start, there's a big problem, you have the right solution for it. You can show that you can produce it in a cost-effective way. You know your target customers well, you know how to reach them. You have a very clear value proposition, which means that you know what's unique to you. You know how to differentiate yourself from your competitors. You have a strong team that has the right skills, and you also know how to acquire more people when you need them. You have a strong business and revenue model, which means that you have some healthy projections. So in the language of investors, that would mean that you are likely to become big and profitable. Then there is your ask, which is fundamentally how much capital you need and what you're offering to investors that want to join you on this journey. So that's the how this story is supposed to look like. And this is how a typical pitch deck, a typical investment deck will look like. When it comes to a very early stage business, you could potentially combine some of these slides, but I think this is a good blueprint, a good template to use. This is a very standard one that investors are very used to. Some entrepreneurs, get very innovative and they get very creative, and they might decide to go for a very different template. Now, I think if you're a first-time founder and you're new to fundraising, you want to stick to something that is, let's say, traditional, that people clearly understand. Now, the areas where I put a star next to it, those are what I call the first filter. This is the very basic. This is what you need to have very strong in order to get a first meeting with investors once you share your pitch deck. And this is the problem, the solution, the market size, and the team. The ones highlighted in yellow, that's the second filter. That's what you need to go from the first meeting to the second meeting and so forth. This is really the how, and that will make a difference because this is what investors use to gauge the likelihood of your idea, of your business to become big and profitable. Now let's go one by one through these different areas. Now the problem. In a typical investment deck, that's where you start. That's where the story begins. And here you need to make sure that you articulate the problem that you're trying to solve very clearly. And also it has to be a clear pain point. It's something that a lot of people are experiencing and are looking for solutions. It should not be nice to have, unless of course you're a serial entrepreneur and you're fundamentally using your own capital. If that's the case, then you can go as niche as you want. But if you're looking at raising external capital, then you need to understand that investors are looking to make money. And that's something that it should be very clear. There are many different kinds of investors, which means that different investors have different return expectations, but all investors are looking to make money. So for example, yesterday we heard from Kun Virada of Film Do. She talked about leveraging licensed movies and games to learn languages. And when she talked about the problem, it was actually quite clear. It was clear and it was big. What she said was that at any point in time, there are 3 billion people trying to learn a foreign language, but over 90% of them drop out. So here you have something that is clear, what the problem is, and that is big enough. 3 billion people is almost half of the world's population is experiencing that. Now, this solution slide is basically where you want to show in a very simple way what your product is and how it's going to solve the problem. And here you need to be very mindful about how you design, how you present this slide. One, because it needs to be, it needs to relate directly to the pain points that you just described before in the problem slide. And two, it needs to be simple enough, simple and easy to understand. And that's where a lot of entrepreneurs have issues because sometimes they struggle to present their idea, their solution in a very simple way, and they get bogged down with adding all the different specs and the features and the characteristics. So that's where it actually helps, trying to take a step back and perhaps asking people that are not involved in your company, trying to see how they might react to the solution slide. If it's the first time that they're looking at it, does that make sense to them? It should actually be intuitive. The worst thing that can happen is when you go through an investment deck and then at the end of the presentation, investors ask you, what is it that you do again? So that would be bad. Now, one example, again, from one of our portfolio is this one. Now, this is a company that is using software to improve supply chain management in the particular sector that they work in. And so here you see there are very clear visual that explain what the software is planning to do, order management, production planning, inventory management, and cost tracking. And then on the right-hand side, you see very clear reference to the pain points that were described during the problem slide. So this is quite clear what the solution is all about. Now, some entrepreneurs, what they decide to do is actually they combine the problem slide and the solution slide in one, so that you have the problem on the left-hand side and the solution on the right hand side, and so it's very clear how the two relate to each other. You don't have to. This is just one option that some entrepreneurs go for. Another option that I've seen is that sometimes founders like to use stories to describe the problem and the solution. So they would tell the story of customer X, let's say customer employee, and they will talk about the problem and how her life is difficult because of this problem, how she's struggling to find the solutions, and then how her life will be improved by using the solution that you're offering, the service or the product that you're offering. So this is something that some entrepreneurs choose to use because the story creates an emotional connection, and then it becomes often easier to relate to it. Now, the market opportunity slide. This is it's very clear that the market opportunity should be huge in terms of the market potential. And by huge, I mean it should be in the billions of dollars. Nowadays, anything that is less than billions of dollars doesn't really get the investor attention. So you should be mindful of that. The visual that you see here on this slide is a very typical way of presenting the market opportunity, and you should be familiar with these three acronyms. The TAM is the total addressable market, so indicates the entire potential of the particular market that you're looking at, and it's typically expressed at global level. So for example, if you're looking at EdTech, then you have a global EdTech market of about $350 billion. Then you've got the SAM, the serviceable addressable market. And this is the portion of the TAM that you could potentially reach based on your offer, the products and the services that you have. But then the SOM is actually the serviceable obtainable market. So it's actually the portion of the TAM that you are planning and likely to reach. That's typically a percentage, a small percentage of the TAM. Is typically in the order of 1 to 5% of the TAM. And this is based on the SOM, you will be producing your revenue forecast, your sales projection. Now, the market opportunity in all larger key sectors is something that investors will be already very familiar with. So in that sense, the TAM is probably not going to be anything new to them, but it's very important that you spend time researching the market, both the TAM, the SAM, and the SOM for your slide. And that shows that you're really understanding the market, that you've done your research, and so that delivers a message to investors. So you need to make sure that you're using good, strong references for that. Now, the value proposition, that's also a very important slide. Now, in medieval times, castles used to be surrounded by large body of waters, a lake typically, and then you'd have the bridge that would be pulled down every time the insiders need to go in and out. And the reason for having this large body of water around was to make it more difficult for outsiders and intruders, to get inside the castle. So that was the moat. Now, the same concept applies to businesses, and this is something that investors are constantly asking about. What is your moat? What is your value proposition? Can be asked in different ways, but the question is the same. What they want to know is, what is your secret sauce? What makes you different from the others? And what prevents other businesses to replicate what you're doing and fundamentally take away your customers? So I would advise businesses to spend a lot of time on this slide and really do some hard thinking and tease out what it is that makes you special, what it is that is hard to replicate. Now, depending on the sector, depending on the specific business, that could be a bunch of different things. It could be patents, it could be specific networks, it could be, for example, the ability to have access to specific communities that are very hard to reach to and that you've spent a long time building the trust of. It could be a unique combination of specific expertise. So if, for example, if you work across, different areas, something that sets you apart from the rest and that makes investor more comfortable that it will be difficult, or at least reasonably difficult, for other businesses to come and take your idea and run with it fundamentally. Now, next we move to the business model. And here by business model, I mean really showing how you make money. So it's fundamentally your revenue streams. Sometimes what we're seeing is that investors actually like to see quite a lot of details, and they also ask about price. So if you want, you can add, a price range for your products and services. For example, this is one way. If your business is working across B2B and B2C, so those are two different revenue streams. They're quite different. They require different strategy. So those are typically separated, and investors like to know that if you're working in B2C, if you're working in B2B, it could also be B2B2C, or sometimes it's B2G if you're working with the government. So it's important to sort of tease out what are the key revenue streams. Again, keeping in mind that you want to be simple and clear. Definitely do not add every single tiny revenue stream, only focus on the key ones. If you're making a little money from ads, but it's a negligible revenue stream, then please, keep that out. That's really not going to make much of a difference. And then if you see here, what I also found it very useful for particularly early stage businesses to give a sense to investors of how they're pricing their products is that you have an indication of the pricing. If you have, if you're in tech, you have some membership products, for example, you typically might have a free version, the free membership that has limited features, and then you have a premium version. You have some paid packages. Now you might have several paid packages and you don't need to include all of them. They'll be quite overwhelming. You can just have a range, as in this case, you have a range of what the price might be. Another option would be, for example, if you work across, you have both online and offline. Again, these are quite two different ways of operating. So it's important to show that investors appreciate that, because it helps them understand how your business works. Now, the go-to-market strategy, this is something that is always asked by investors. They typically spend a lot of time on the go-to-market strategy and really understanding that, because this is the how you are going about your business, how you selling your products, how you're acquiring and retaining customers. And the purpose of the go-to-market strategy, or the purpose of these slides, I should say, is actually that you want to show how effective you are being at acquiring and retaining customers. So that, again, as with the concept of the market opportunity slide, this is a way for you to show that you have a very deep understanding of the sector. You understand your customer segments, the ones that you're trying to reach to, and you know how to get there. So this goes well beyond the marketing budget. It's also about the distribution channels. It's about the partners that you work with on the ground. It's really the how your vision is basically taking shape on the ground. And for example, businesses that work across different Southeast Asian countries, they would know that the go-to-market strategy will be very different from country to country, because customers have different needs, different preferences, so they need to be reached in a different way. So this is also a place where you can add key metrics, and every sector will have different metrics. If you work in tech, you'll be familiar with these ones. The CAC, it's the customer acquisition cost, is basically how much does it cost you to reach your customers, to get them through the door and to get them to sign the contract. The conversion rate is if you are looking at your total number of customers, your total number of users, what is the percentage of them that will be converted into paying users? So again, going to the example of the membership product, a lot of the people might use the free membership product, but a percentage of them will decide to move the paid membership because there are more features. And so that's a very, very key important metric that for sure you'll be asked about. So you need to know that on the top of your head. The churn rate is how the percentage of customers that will be leaving you every month. And so these are all metrics that are very important to know, because fundamentally what the investors wants to know is what is the true cost for you to acquire those customers, and then what is the total cost for you to retain those customers. Hence, you look at the conversion rate and you look at the churn rate. If as I said, every sector has your own set of metrics. If you work, for example, real estate and hospitality, you might be more familiar with revenue per square meters, the cash conversion cycle, the same store sales growth, where you basically compare how different stores are doing against each other. And you don't necessarily need to have these metrics down on the slide, but you definitely need to know them. Again, it has to be on your fingertips, because these are some of the metrics that have been asked. We hear them all the time being asked by investors. Now, the competition slide. These This is a slide that is also one that investors use to gauge your understanding of the sector, where you see yourself in comparison to others, how you differentiate yourself, and also if the market is too crowded. That's another thing. I think when it comes to the key sectors, most active investors will have a reasonable idea of the competition landscape. But again, this is for them a way to assess how well you know your sector. And some of the common mistakes here is that when entrepreneurs, when they're asked, who are your biggest competitors? And the answer is, I don't have any competitors. Now, that's a big no-no. I definitely don't say that. And that's the reason, because it's impossible not to have competitors for most business. I can't think of anyone that doesn't have a competitor. Now, sometimes you don't have a direct competitor that is doing exactly what you're doing in the same way, but you definitely would have competitor in the sense of other businesses that are trying to address the same pain points and that are trying to reach to the same customers. So those are your competitors, and you need to include them. Also, some of the things that I hear quite often is that I'm the only business in Southeast Asia doing this. Now, again, I would advise against saying something like that, because nowadays in 2020, it's actually very difficult that this is the case. I sometimes hear that, and I do know that it's not the case. I do have examples of competitors. Sometimes it usually shows insufficient knowledge of the competitive landscape. One of the things that sometimes businesses do is that they like to compare themselves with only the market leaders. So the very, very well-established companies that everybody knows of, and that often might have already established company, they might have originated in other parts of the world. Now, but they disregard, they don't include the smaller competitors that are closer to us. They might be in the same country or in neighboring countries, and those are actually represent more of a threat. So again, as in the case of the market opportunity, just make sure that you spend time researching the market and looking around. Again, they don't need, your competitors do not need to be doing exactly what you do, but they are the ones that are focusing on the same target market and addressing the same pain points. Then we move to the financials. Now, this is basically really where you are fundamentally, you're showing how much you're planning to make. Now, if you are a business that's been around for some time, you have some sales and revenues to show, by all means, include your historicals. For early stage businesses, I would say that a 3-year revenue projection is more than enough. For those ones that are more stable, that have been around for longer, then you'd move to 5-year projections. But for the earlier ones, because there is so much uncertainty, and there is 5-year projections would be too much of a wild guess, I would say. So it's not requested, it's not necessary. Now, I would also suggest this is typically done in the form of a bar chart. where you see the bars going up, hopefully considerably. And then it's also good to indicate the revenue mix and the key drivers of growth. So that basically means that you want to give an indication of where you expect most of the sales to be coming from. So for example, if you're looking across B2C and B2B, then and the perhaps let's say the 80% of your revenues come from B2B, then you'd want to indicate that. Because then investors would know, okay, if most of the growth is coming from B2B, then they need to put priorities on a certain go-to-market strategy. For example, if you're working across a few different countries and again, there is one that is particularly strong when it comes to growth projections, then you'd want to indicate that. Another thing that you can include, if it makes sense, are some meaningful metrics such as, for example, the number of customers that you might need, that you need in order to achieve the year 3 projections. Again, you want to only if it makes sense, only if there is room on the slide. You definitely don't want to overcrowd this one. It's definitely a slide that is going to get a lot of scrutiny, a lot of attention. And so you want to make sure that is done very well. Some of the common mistakes that I see is that sometimes the numbers are too small, it's very difficult to read. Sometimes people forget the currency. Sometimes people forget the unit. So you don't know if it's millions, billions, thousands. So those kind of things are very important. Now we move to the team. The purpose of this slide is to answer the investor question, why you? Why should investors back you rather than one of the several competitors that are doing something similar to you? So in this case, and then it's obviously particularly important when it comes to early stage company, particularly the ones that are still almost at the idea stage, because you can have the most brilliant idea, but if you don't have the right team, then that's going to stay at the idea stage. It's not going to be executed. So here, what you want to show is that you have specific expertise in the sector that you're in or the sector that you're moving into. And here, so what we're seeing is that because of the COVID pandemic, there are a lot of businesses that have traditionally operated offline that are moving online, fully or partially, or they're adding a tech component. And so all of a sudden, they're basically moving into a sector where they didn't have previous expertise in. And so it's very, then you need, in order to be able to raise, if you're raising for something related to tech, an app, a software, and so on, you definitely need to show that you have your tech expertise in-house, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult for you to pull that off. It's going to be very difficult for you to raise money without that. Now, obviously, CTOs, the chief technical officers, are expensive. They are difficult to find. They are typically not resources that are very readily available, even in this market. And it might be difficult for an early stage company to secure an experienced CTO from the get-go. So what you might want to do here is to get a tech advisor, perhaps a part-time CTO. But what you also need to show to investors is that you know where to draw expertise from when you need it, when you have raised capital, and when you have sufficient resources to hire an experienced full-time CTO. And as I said, without doing that, it will be very difficult to convince investors that you can actually pull that through and execute on your idea. Also, because if you don't have any internal tech expertise, the question is, how are you going to select the right CTO? That's it's quite clear. One of the things that I would suggest on this slide, such as with the other ones, is to keep it simple and to include only the key people. It doesn't need to look like a jam-packed with tons of heads. You just need to have the key people, the ones that are really the senior management, the key advisors, the ones that are really contributing, the key contributors to the strategy and the implementation of your business. Finally, we move to the ask, and this is really where you give the details of how much capital you're raising. You typically would have a pie chart that indicates the uses of funds. So, for example, if you're raising $1 million, perhaps a third goes to tech development, a third goes to go-to-market strategy, and the third goes to building your team, and perhaps 10% for working capital. That's just an example. So it's quite typical. Investors typically want to know what you're planning to use the funds for. It's also good if you can to demonstrate what you're planning to do with those funds. What are the key milestones? What is the value that you're planning to create? And then also one of the common questions when it comes to the ask is your runway. The investors typically ask how long your runway will be, which means how long will you be able to keep running your business with these funds until you need to raise again. And when it comes to an early stage business, the typical runway is about 12 months. And after that, they'll need to raise again, typically because at the early stage, there is so much investment into R&D and building the team, of course. So now we've gone through the key areas of an investment deck. And what I'd like to emphasize is that for a successful pitch, now you need a narrative. So you need the substance, which is the strong narrative that should be captivating, should be engaging, it should make sense. But what you also need is the form and the delivery. And those are no things that I'm going to focus on. There is a lot of content out there. I just wanted to mention it for you to be aware of. The form is obviously the fact that your investment deck need to be visually appealing, from the font size to the type of font that you use should be coherent, to the palette of colors that you use. That should be the palette of your brand, should be your brand colors, to things that need to be aligned, slides that are not too overcrowded and overwhelming. Everything that will make an investment deck visually appealing, easy to read. If it's overwhelming, then people will just get confused. Delivery has got to do with the body language, the tone of voice, the type of apparel that you decide to wear. It should be something that you're comfortable in, but it's also something that, of course, is professional, it's reasonable, and that varies depending on the country, depending on the sector, and it's obviously something that you need to apply your judgment on. So those are all things that are very, very important and that do make a difference when you are talking to investors and in securing the follow-up meeting. Another thing that I wanted to mention before we wrap up is that you need to also spend some time doing background checks. Doing homework on the investors that you're going to meet. Once you have the meeting schedule, you'll be given the names, and I'll spend some time looking those people up and trying to understand a little bit their background, their expertise, where they might be coming from, and so trying to anticipate what they might be looking for. At least it gives you an idea of the people you'll be talking to. But then at the same time, the suggestions that I would like to give is that take the opportunity when you talk to investors to also ask the questions that matter to you, and take that as an opportunity to gauge and assess whether those investors might be the right fit for you and might be the right partners on your journey to building your company. Because there are many different kinds of investors, not only in terms of check size and sector, but also in terms of how they handle the relationship with their investees and how they see these strategic partnerships. So some might not be the right fit, even if they're interested in investing in your company. So I think it's important that you take some time to think about what's important for you, what you're looking for in an investor, and you make sure that you try to assess that when you talk to them, perhaps not in the first meeting, but definitely in the following meetings if you have an opportunity to do so. So I think on this note, I'd like to wrap up the presentation. Here is my contact information. Happy to answer any question now or later if you want to contact me. This is my email, and LinkedIn is also a very easy way to reach me. So thank you for listening.